Morning, guys. Good to have you here this morning. And as you see, today we are in our third session on the series, Speaking into the Chaos. Today we're focusing on speaking into the chaos, assaulting gender and sexuality. And that video comes from a documentary that Doug Wilson, a great pastor, writer out in Utah, made, and I think it's called The Free Speech. I'll figure out what it is. If you're interested, it's worth picking up. Just a lot of good stuff there. But what we see there is it's all about chaos and confusion as a result of this whole thing of gender and sexuality. That's what we're going to talk about today. But I want to begin in Matthew 16, verses 2 and 3. Jesus says this. You know the saying, he's saying this to the Pharisees, red sky at night means fair weather tomorrow. Red sky in the morning means foul weather all day. You know how to interpret the weather signs in the sky, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the times. Now, what's Jesus saying here? Well, in essence, what Jesus is saying is this. To understand zeitgeist, we must learn to recognize and interpret the signs of our times. What he's saying is there's an unseen world going on around us. And if we're not aware of it, if we're not able to read it and see it by the things going on around us and connect the dots to make sense of what's going on, we're going to miss it. And so Jesus says, if we want to understand the spirit of our age, what's going on in the unseen world around us, we must learn to recognize the signs of the times. So, what are the signs of the times? Well, maybe today one of the ways that we can think about that is to consider some recent headlines. For example, and these are just a couple that we could have done this all day. First, the Sun Times, August 20th, 2018. We're a normal family. The world's first pregnant man says he'd do it again. And Fox News, December 18th, 2019, the ACLU calls for tampons in men's rooms in order to achieve menstrual equality. And then the Spectator, July 1st, 2019, some women have penises. If you won't sleep with them, you're transphobic. Now, pregnant man, menstrual equality, women have penises. Guys, either that's crazy talk that we need to dismiss, or maybe it's some of the signs of the times that we need to interpret. If they're signs, then the question is, how do we interpret them? Okay? Well, if we take Matthew 16, what Jesus implied in Matthew 16 to the Pharisees, implied was this. The signs of the times are to be interpreted through the lens of God's Word. In Matthew 16, Jesus, the Messiah, had come. Jesus was bringing in the kingdom. It was talked about that in the Old Testament. The Pharisees were asking for signs, and Jesus says, hey, you can understand the weather, but you can't understand the signs of the times. If you know what's going on, what the Word of God says in the Old Testament, you know what all that means for what you see going on today. And what I'm saying is, I think we can do the same thing. So here we are today, 2020, and here's the news, the headlines in the news, all the things that are going on with regards to gender and sexuality. And what I'm saying is, if we follow Jesus' advice to understand the signs of the times, of our times, we need to view them through the lens of God's Word. Looking at them through the lens of God's Word will help us understand the spirit of our age, what's going on in the unseen world around us. And what I want to ask is this. Might these signs tell us what the current climate is in regards to the spirit of the age. Might these signs, pregnant man, women with penises, menstrual equality, and on it goes, might they be signs that tell us, as we look through God's Word, that tell us something about what's going on in the unseen world? And really, that's been my thesis for this series. The thesis of this series goes like this. Behind today's headlines is a chaotic storm. We feel it. We saw it in the video clip, in which the serpent of old, the ancient serpent, Satan, is deceptively working, just as he did in the garden. He works through cunning and deception. And what is he doing? He's working to turn people away from God and his ways. He did that in the garden. He's been doing that ever since throughout human history. And guess what, guys? He hasn't stopped doing it today. He's still working to turn people away from God and his ways. How is he doing it? Well, in Genesis 3, he did it by assaulting the goodness of God's created order, how man was supposed to relate with God. And he's doing that because to assault the goodness of creation order is to lose human flourishing. Why? Because remember, the goodness of the creation order, God, the first 6 days, God created and it was good. God created and it was good. It was good, it was good, it was good. And God is putting a rhythm and an order of creation. And he puts man into it and he says, now this is very good for you to flourish. And so what Satan does in Genesis 3, and my thesis is what he's doing today, he's assaulting the goodness of the creation order, because if you move us out of that goodness, guess what happens? Human beings fail to flourish. And God has made us and put us in a world to flourish. So that's the thesis. And really it all began with a message, Genesis 3, verse 4, in which the serpent says in essence this: God and his ways are oppressive, and they must be replaced. God and all his ways are oppressive. God is an oppressor, and his ways are oppressive, and his ways and him as an authority, as a power, need to be replaced. And guess what? If you listen carefully, you hear that same echo in what we have come to call in the series so far contemporary secularism. Now, just to remind you what that is, how we've defined that, it's kind of an umbrella term for what's going on in the world today. It's a framework for doing life, how people are living. It's this kind of a narrative, a story out of which people are living, a framework for doing life that holds any hope for human flourishing. And I have any hope because it's a very cynical approach, because what they ultimately believe is, there really isn't any hope. But if there is going to be hope for human flourishing, it will require the liberation of minority identity groups, such as what we're seeing today, the transgender, the gay, the lesbian, all of that, feminism, all of that, from all social norms and beliefs that were constructed by dominant identity groups. And those beliefs and norms that were constructed by the dominant groups work to oppress and violate the minority's identity, truth, and power. That's my definition of what we're coining contemporary secularism. Now remember, it was built on the foundation of three things. Secularism, which in essence says God is not necessary for life. He may be there, he may not be there, but no big deal, because God doesn't count in our lives. We're here on our own to live on our own for ourselves. And it also has a combination of postmodernism, which in essence says universal truth does not exist. You have to create your own truth, and nobody else can tell you what your truth is and what yours isn't. And then critical theory, which is a political theory that says struggle for power is all that there is and all that there ever will be. In fact, I think I said last time, when somebody dies, you hear RIP, right? What does that stand for? Rest in peace. According to critical theory, it isn't RIP, rest in peace. It is RIP, rest in power. Because it's an eternal power struggle that everything is in. It never stops. Now, to accomplish this liberation of the minority or the marginalized identity groups, you accomplish it through social justice, which is liberation through revolution. You take those norms and beliefs that society has always believed, and guess what you do with them? You crush them, you abolish them, you get rid of them. So that's contemporary secularism. And what I'm saying is this is an echo of what we hear in the Garden of Eden, that God is an oppressor, and his ways are oppressive, so they and God must be replaced. And what we said is that what we're seeing today is the new skin on the same old serpent, doing the same thing, working to turn people away from God and his ways. A book also, as we're continuing to review here, that I suggested, I think last time, by James Lindsay, Cynical Theories. If you want one book that will help you understand all of this, it's an excellent book. Pick that book up, Cynical Theories. And it's not really, it's done well. It's not, you don't have to be a philosopher to understand it, although he is a philosopher. Now, last time, if you were here, we were taking this thesis and we were applying it to marriage and the family, and we talked about speaking into the chaos, assaulting marriage and the family. And this idea of speaking into the chaos, by the way, remember, what we saw is that men were made to speak into the chaos. That's what Adam's job was. When the chaos came in Genesis 3, Adam did not speak into the chaos. He was compliant, passive, and silent. And he acted not as a masculine man, but a submasculine man. God has made us to speak into the chaos. That's what it means to be masculine. A masculine man lives out what he was created and designed to do, to speak into the chaos. And so what we're saying is that we all have platforms, we all have places to speak into the chaos. Last time we talked about what that looked like in regards to marriage and the family. Now today, as we said, we're going to be focusing on speaking into the chaos, assaulting gender and sexuality. And I wanted to do this, and we're going to do this at 10,000 feet, but 10,000 feet there is still so much to say that I just didn't want us to assume that we understood things that maybe we don't understand. So what we're doing is we're going to put this into two parts. Today will be part one, and then next time, December, will be part two. And so what we're going to do the fourth session and what we're going to do in December, we're going to move over to the first of the year. So that's what we're going to do. But in part one, today is the current storm cloud over America. And here we're just going to get an overview of the transgender, or what I'm going to call today the gender revolution. And then next time in December, we're going to look at, in part two, God's good design for human identity. And then the serpent's cunning assault on human identity and how that's playing in what we see today. And then the masculine choice set before us. Are we going to be silent and passive and compliant or complicit with the chaos? Or are we going to be men and speak into the chaos? And if so, what will that look like for you as a man? We all have different platforms and we all have different callings, and it's going to look different for all of us. But we all have to understand what it will mean for us to speak into the chaos, okay? So let's get started then on this part one, and the current storm cloud over America. If you look at it, just again the headlines and all what's going on in our culture today, what you see is that the storm around us is creating confusion and chaos about sexuality and gender. You know, you look at that clip, there was just chaos and confusion in the room, right? I mean, that was just obvious. But if you looked into the eyes of the people that were creating the chaos and the confusion, guess what you saw? Chaos and confusion within themselves. And it was all that chaos and confusion within themselves that was creating the chaos and confusion in the environment. And so the storm we see in America today, that's over America, that's hovering over us, our current storm cloud, is a storm cloud that's creating confusion and chaos regarding human sexuality and gender. For example, there's some cultural observers of American society tell us that we're currently going through a gender revolution. A few months ago, National Geographic had a cover story on the gender revolution. Katie Couric did a whole documentary on the gender revolution. Ryan Anderson, who is a political philosopher for the Heritage Institute, has written a book in which his whole thesis is we're currently living in a transgender moment. If you look at what's going on in politics, there's transgender civil rights bills seeking to be passed. And they're saying that this is the most important civil rights issue of the day, the transgender civil rights issue. In fact, Joe Biden said this is the most pressing civil rights issue of our day, the transgender issue. Walt Heyer, former LGBT activist, says this: in today's gender revolution, transgender is the ultimate of all genders. You can put it like this. In the LGBTQ movement, T is the most important letter. In fact, T is the most important letter, so much it is the most important that it has begun to cancel out LGB. In fact, remember Martina Navratilova. Remember her? Great tennis player. Not only was she a feminist activist, but she was also a lesbian activist. And she was the darling of the movement for years. And then as the T began to grow and the gender into women getting into sports, and the men, the transgender women that are now in women's sports are winning all the titles, she began to speak out about it. And what happened to her? The darling of the moment of the movement became what? The enemy of the movement. They eat their own as it continues to press forward. So the question we need to ask ourselves then is this: could chaotic storm grow into a gender revolution? How did that happen? Well, again, just to give you an overview of how it happened, how it developed in America, again, it really was all about this sexual revolution, right? And it began in the early 60s with the feminist movement, which was all about sexual equality. And to have sexual equality, we were told that we need to have contraception, free contraception, and legal and free abortion. And if we had contraception and we had abortion, then there would be sexual equality. Why? Because men can have sex and walk away with no responsibility, but women can't have sex and walk away. They have kids. And so that's unfair. And so what we have in the early 60s is sex without responsibility. Next, in the 1969, we have a riot at a gay bar in New York, which really began the gay rights movement, which was not about sexual equality, it was about sexual orientation. And here we have the movement towards legalization of homosexuality, gay pride, all the marches and everything, gay marriage. And all of that was about sex without traditional norms. Prior to that, it was not legal to have sex men with men. Traditional norms said sex could only happen with man with a woman. What the gay rights movement challenged was sexual, traditional norms for sex. So that then became part of the storm cloud over America. But it didn't stop there. The storm continued, and next, which was blown in, was the LGBTQ movement, which was sexual autonomy. I determine who I am, my gender, my sexuality, all what I'm about. And that really began around 2015 or so. It was growing, but it really took on legs in around 2015. And this is when the whole idea of gender identity, public policies regarding bathrooms and all of that, remember that. And while the feminist movement was sex without responsibility and gay rights movement was sex without traditional norms, the LGBTQ movement was about sex without meaning. Because there is nothing fixed, there's nothing meaningful. You create your own identity, you create your own meaning, but it might mean this today and it might mean something different tomorrow. So it's always fluid, it's always changing. And if it's always fluid and it's always changing, it has no meaning. Now I want you to notice something. Notice how I put this on the screen. It's not just linear straight across, it's linear, but what is it doing? It's descending. Why the downward progression? Well, if we take Romans 1 and we take it seriously and we paraphrase it, Paul, in essence, in Romans 1 says this: when a society turns away from the Creator, it becomes untethered from the goodness of God's fixed creation order, which is necessary for human flourishing. In other words, God has created human beings and creation to have a certain order. And if human beings turn away from that by turning away from God and buying into the lie, the outcome is they're untethered from that good order, and the outcome is a downward progression. Now, if we take that and we use that as the lens, which Jesus says, use the Scripture as the lens in which we see the signs of the times going on today, what we can say about the gender revolution is this. The gender revolution is the current chaotic climate in American society. It is a part of the downward moral progression associated with turning from God's fixed creation order. It's a downward moral progression, guys. And what I'll predict today is, while the T is important today, it's the focus today, and the next letter is what? Q. And the Q is kind of, it's a darling, but it's not as important. Guess what's going to happen? The T is going to begin to shrink, and the Q is going to get bigger. Because the T still says this: there is a binary to men and women. I'm a man, but I become a woman. Or a woman becomes a man. That's binary. What Q says is there's no binary. Everything is fluid. You create your own. It's gender, it's all on a spectrum. That, I predict, is going to begin to grow, and the T is going to begin to shrink. Just watch. So with that in mind, the question is this: if the gender revolution is the current cloud in the chaotic storm that's assaulting America, and if Jesus calls us to interpret the signs of the times just as we would forecast the weather, then what do we know about the gender revolution to help us more fully or more accurately interpret them as the signs of the times, then, so that we can better know the spirit of our age, what's really going on in the unseen world around us? What do we know about it? Well, come back in 5 minutes and we will begin to think about this whole idea of what is this transgender revolution, okay? Welcome back, guys. During the break, somebody asked, what does the letter Q stand for in LGBTQ? Q stands for the word queer. And by queer, what they mean is outside the normal range that was traditionally considered normal. So we traditionally considered male and female as normal. What they're saying is queer means we're outside of that. We're not in the normal range of things. So that's what Q stands for. Well, prior to the break, we asked the question, if the gender revolution is the current cloud of the chaotic storm over America today, and if Jesus calls us as men to interpret the signs of the times, the headlines, everything we see going on around us, like we forecast the weather, then what do we need to know about the gender revolution that will help us more fully and more accurately interpret the signs of the times? What really is going on in regards to this gender revolution? Well, as I looked at it, and again, there's so much we can say here, but I want to give like a 10,000, 30,000 foot level. There are 4 important things I think we need to understand in order to understand what exactly is this gender revolution. And we cannot, and unless we understand what it is, we won't know what it means to speak into it. So, and we won't know how to interpret it through the lens of God's Word. So before we think about interpreting it, and before we think about stepping into it, we need to first think about exactly what is this gender revolution, okay? Because I think as much as we see it around us, and as much confusion and chaos that it creates, a lot of it just leaves us confused and chaos because we're not always sure what is being said. And likewise, I think as you read some of this stuff, I'm not sure they're always sure what's being said. So let's look and see what we do know, what we can say. This is what this revolution is about. First of all, it's built around a genuine concern. It's built around a genuine concern. That's the first thing. Second thing, it's centered in a radical ideology. Third, it's actively pushing a political agenda. And fourth, it's serious about changing our minds. And again, I'm going to just give this at 30,000 feet, but if you would like to read more about this, there's one book. If you're going to buy 2 books this next year, get the Cynical Theory one, and then get this one, When Harry Became Sally, Ryan T. Anderson. That is an excellent book, and it speaks to exactly what we need to understand to fully understand what this movement is about. Well, let's look at each one of these one by one. First, what is the gender revolution? Well, the gender revolution is built around a genuine concern. And what is a genuine concern? Well, it's a genuine concern for hurting people. There's a real human problem that the gender revolution is focused on. And what is that problem? It's the psychological distress and social isolation that some men and women experience and struggle with all through their life, that's associated with, there's a incongruence between who they are on the outside as a man and a woman and who they experience themselves to be on the inside as a man or a woman. In other words, as I have here, their internal sense of gender does not match their external biological sex. Put like this, they exist biologically in this world as a male or female, and when we're using the word sexuality, that's what we're talking about, biological man or a biological woman. But psychologically, they experience the world as the opposite sex. They feel like they're a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body. They feel like I'm male on the outside, but I'm female on the inside. I'm feminine on the inside. I'm female on the outside, but I feel masculine on the inside. That is a very real problem. It's not a choice. It's not something people just say, oh, I think I'm going to do this. It's something that people definitely struggle with, and it's an awful struggle, and that's what we mean by transgender. Bruce Jenner, who was the world's greatest athlete, 1976, he won the decathlon in Montreal at the Olympics. But years later, he became the world's most famous transgender. And I don't know if any of you watched the documentary that I think was Diane Sawyer, ABC, did of him. But one of the lines that I remember, it was just sad. It was so sad to hear his story. One of the things he says, I longed to be a woman. Being trapped in a man's body was torture. In fact, you know what he said? A lot of what drove him to become the world's greatest athlete was him trying to somehow fix this discrepancy that he felt. He was someone on the outside, but he felt like a woman on the inside, a man on the outside and a woman on the inside, and that filled him with shame, it filled him with confusion, and he didn't know what to do, so what he tried to do is prove that he really is a man, and that drove his athletic performance. It's a terrible, tragic story. Another person by the name of Max in website Born Wrong, he says this, I didn't know anyone who survived feelings like mine without transitioning into a woman. He says the only alternative of not transitioning was a miserable life cut short by suicide. Leelah, a 17-year-old girl who did commit suicide. This is her suicide letter to her friends from People magazine, December 2014. She says this, please don't be sad, she's talking to her friends, it's for the better. The life I would have lived isn't worth living in because I'm transgender. When I told my mom, she reacted extremely negatively, telling me that it was a phase, that I would never truly be a girl, a boy wanting to be a girl, that God doesn't make mistakes, that I'm wrong. Parents, please don't tell this to your kids, even if you're a Christian or are against transgender people. Don't ever say to someone, especially your kid, that won't do anything but make them hate themselves. That's exactly what it did to me. Either I live the rest of my life as a lonely man who wishes he were a woman, or I live my life as a lonelier woman who hates herself. There's no winning. There's no way out. And she believed that, he believed that so much that at 17 committed suicide. I don't know if you've known anybody that struggles with this, but it isn't something they choose. Like Bruce Jenner says, it was something that tortured him. It's a terrible concern. It's a terrible thing that people experience. And this gender revolution is built around that. Now, what is this painful struggle? How do the experts look at this? Well, prior to 2013, the DSM-4, which is what doctors or psychologists use to diagnose mental disorders, that type of thing, and it changes. What is it? Every couple years, it goes from the DSM-4, DSM-5. I don't know, is it DSM-6 now or still on 5 yet? Okay. So prior to 2013, the DSM-4 saw this as a psychological diagnosis. It was called gender identity dysphoria. And it was described as a lack of congruence between one's internalized sense of gender and one's fixed biological sex. In other words, what I felt who I was on the inside didn't match who I was on the outside. Okay? Now, it was estimated that at that time, 0.005% men struggled with gender identity dysphoria, while 0.002% women. The symptoms, as I said, were extreme psychological distress, social isolation, and suicide rate that was 19 times higher than the average American population. That's huge, 19 times higher. The cause was said to be delusion. They really weren't sure in terms of its psychopathology, where it came from. Some speculated that it was a form of homosexual guilt. Some speculated that it was a form of heterosexual arousal, but they really weren't sure. But at core, what they believed, it was delusional in nature. And so what was the solution? What was the treatment for gender identity dysphoria? Well, prior to 213, it was to realign the internal gender feelings with the external biological sex through what was called reparative therapy. In other words, through talk therapy, you would work to uncover these feelings, where they've come from, and we want to realign these feelings with your gender, your sexual gender, male or female. So if I was a man on the outside, but feeling like a woman on the inside, reparative therapy would work through talk therapy to help these feelings on the inside, feeling like a woman, begin to realign with who I am on the outside, so that I would feel both like a man on the outside and a man on the inside. Now that's what it was like prior to 2013. But I want you to note something important. After 2013, with the next issue in the DSM-5, the diagnosis was renamed from gender identity dysphoria to simply gender dysphoria. And it was described like this. It's a lack of congruence between one's true inner gender identity and one's sex assigned at birth. Now it's no longer a lack of congruence between one's inward gender feelings and one's outward biological sex. Now notice it's a lack of congruence between one's true gender identity, which is you determine on the inside, and one's sex assigned at birth. The sex, male or female, boy or girl, that the doctor gave you, or that your mother or father told you that you were. Now notice, it comes with a new cause. No longer is it delusional. Now it's said to be a normal variation of human development. It's just another way that people develop as human beings. And because it's normal and because it's just a different way of human development, the treatment now is going to be different. What we do now is to align the biological sex with the internal gender identity through not reparative therapy, but through affirmation therapy. In other words, no longer do we change the inside to match the outside. Now we change the outside to match the inside. And how do you do that? Well, affirmation and therapy really involves two things. Hormone treatment. If you're a man, you get estrogen. If you're a woman, you get testosterone. And if you're doing this prior to puberty, you get puberty blockers. And they do this with kids 4 years old. Not only that, but when you are ready, then you have sex change surgery, where you are given breasts, you're changed, in where you are as your genitalia, male and female. There's total change. In other words, what I want you to see is this. Prior to 213, gender identity was determined by what? Our biological sex. And if there was any incongruence, that was called gender identity dysphoria, and it was seen as a psychopathology, as a pathology, something wrong. After 2013, gender identity is now determined by subjective feelings. And if there's any incongruence between the outside and the inside, it was called gender dysphoria, but now it's not seen as a pathology. Now it's simply seen as a variation of normal human development. And prior to 2013, treatment was to align subjective feelings with biological sex. After 2013, it was to align biological sex with subjective feelings. And as a result, where we are today is this, guys. If you're operating out of the 2013 model, that's said to be destructive to transgender flourishing. In fact, reparative therapy is illegal and banned in many states. Is it banned in Michigan, Kevin? Do you know?
Reparative therapy?
Reparative therapy?
Yeah, you can get big trouble for that.
In Michigan. I know it's not in all the states, but at least we know it's in Michigan. Today, the affirmative therapy with the hormones and surgery is considered the pathway to transgender flourishing, which is being pushed today by medical activists. Now here's the question. Why this sudden and drastic diagnostic shift in the American medical and psychological community? What happened that it went from this gender identity is determined by biological sex to what we experience today, gender identity is determined by my subjective feelings? What in the heck happened that created that? Well, that brings us to the second thing. Not only is the gender revolution built on a genuine human concern, but it is centered in a radical ideology. What is that? Well, it's this ideology is shaped by the three core beliefs of contemporary secularism. And what are they? Well, postmodernism, no objective truth, no objective universal reality. Secularism, there's no creator or design. Everything is self-autonomy. You determine who you are yourself. And critical theory, power and oppression is all there is. Now watch. Postmodernism, which says there's no objective truth and no universal reality, says my truth exists in my subjective mind apart from any outward objective physical reality, like my body. Because of secularism, therefore, I have the self-autonomy to determine my gender identity. My body doesn't determine it. The social norms don't determine it. Religion doesn't determine that. I determine my gender identity, not anything else. Which means then that traditional sex and gender beliefs are oppressive social constructs that must be abolished. Therefore, the gender revolution. That's what's going on today. It is this radical ideology. Put another way, simpler form, the gender revolution is centered in a radical new ideology that challenges all historical and traditional beliefs about what it means to be human. That's what it's about. It's about what it means to be human. Put another way, what they're telling us is this. Human identity, the core of who we are, is purely self-defined, transcending all biological reality and all objective reality. I determine who I am. Anything else is oppressive, and it needs to be abolished. That's the ideology driving the gender revolution. See this in just some of the elites today. Dr. Deanna Adkins, professor of Duke University School of Medicine, says this: gender dysphoria is no longer considered a mental disorder, but simply a normal variation of human development. It is counter to medical science to use chromosomes, counter to medical science, to use chromosomes, hormones, internal reproductive organs, external genitalia to override gender identity. for the purpose of classifying somebody as male or female. That was in a lawsuit. She was considered an expert witness. What's she saying here? She's saying this: human identity is not informed by one's embodied sexuality. It has nothing to do with it. Transgender Americans Handbook for Understanding says this: human beings are actually the sex they determine themselves to be, irrespective of biology. A trans boy is a boy. He really is a boy. He doesn't just think he's a boy. He really is a boy, not merely a girl who identifies as a boy. This is all part of normal human development. Our true gender identity doesn't always match our physical sex. What's he saying? They're saying human identity is a self-determinative process based on one's subjective feelings, not one's embodied sexuality. It has nothing to do with who you are on the outside. That's irrelevant. Which means then the body is irrelevant, right? The American Psychological Association says this: gender identity is a person's internal sense of being male, female, or something else. Now, in saying something else, what do they open the door for? Q. Because human identity, what they're saying is self-determined, not predetermined by our physical body, it need not be restricted to a binary gender choice. You can choose something else. It all is on a spectrum. It's all fluid. In fact, when they say fluid, it means you can be this today and you can be something totally different tomorrow. And doesn't have to be male or female. It can be something of your own making. You create yourself. Deanna Ehrensaft, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that, Director of Mental Health, Children's Hospital, University of California, says this: our gender identity exists between our ears, in our brains and minds, not necessarily by what's between our legs, our genitalia, or in our accompanying XX or XY chromosomes, as many are mistakenly prone to believe. What she's saying? It's the truly enlightened people that no longer believe that human identity is informed by an embodied sexuality. If you believe gender identity is associated with our embodied sexuality, then what? You are part of the great unwoke. Dr. Judith Butler, professor at the University of California in Berkeley, says this: the human body is a social construct. To view it as something fixed and indisputable is pernicious. It's harmful because it successfully buries and masks the genealogy of power relationships by which it is constituted. What in the world is she saying here? I think she's saying something like this: the biological, social distinctions of the human body must be erased, as they have historically promoted obsessive and harmful power structures. You have to erase the sexual distinctions of the body. They are meaningless. That's what she wants us to believe. In other words, what are all these elites saying? They're saying this: the gender revolution, while built around a real human concern, is centered in a radical ideology which says this: human beings are self-defined, self-conscious persons that only inhabit a non-personal body. That's what they're telling us. Now, the real person is the conscious gender self, progressively self-identified through subjective feelings, and that might take some time to do that. And the physical body is an all but meaningless tool that at best serves the conscious gender self, and at worst serves against it. That's the ideology. Human beings are self-defined, self-conscious persons that only inhabit a non-personal body. Ryan Anderson, again, wrote the book When Harry Became Sally that I recommended. He says this: today gender has come to be regarded as something of one's own making, a domain of the disembodied will which chooses an identity without needing to justify the choice. I think that's a great summary. So, in light of all that, here's another question. Why is this radical ideology about human identity being advocated by the medical and academic elite? Why are they doing this? Well, it's because the gender revolution is actively pushing a political agenda. They're not just thinking in the ivory towers about this. They're thinking in the ivory towers and wanting to make it mainstream. That's their agenda. To make this radical ideology about human identity mainstream in the American culture. And what we mean by mainstream, when you think of mainstream, what do you think? Majority. But it's not just the majority of people who, oh, okay, I can tolerate it. Mainstream means accept, embrace, and celebrate this new ideology, not just tolerate it. They're not just interested in having us tolerate it, they want us to bow down to it. That's their agenda, and it's a political agenda. Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, who wrote the book, Reparative Therapy of the Male Homosexual, which I have, which is now considered banned and illegal in our state, says in his first chapter of the book, he says this: the diagnostic change is the result of, in the DSM manual, is the result of a political agenda, not good science. And he says this: the combined effects of the sexual revolution and the rights movements, civil rights, minority rights, feminist rights, have resulted in a politically intimidating effect upon psychology. He continues, the reversal of the APA's diagnostic classification was not based upon an approximation of the scientific truth as dictated by reason, but watch what he says now, but was instead an action demanded by the ideological temper of these times. What's he saying? He's saying this: political pressure from a radical ideology resulted in the diagnostic change. It wasn't science. It was, if we're going to be politically correct, guess what we got to do? We got to forget science and buy into the politics. There's a political agenda. And in case you don't think there's a political agenda, you ever heard of the Human Rights Campaign? Human Rights Campaign was established in 1980. It's the LGBTQ political lobbying group. It's a very powerful group. They describe themselves in their description on their website as political activists in nature. Listen to what they say. They describe themselves as this: a newly energized and passionate force of LGBTQ people and allies that is calling attention to the most urgent opportunities for change and making that change a reality. That's activist, isn't it? Political activism. And you see they have a political agenda in their mission statement. Their mission statement is this: to create a world where every member of the LGBTQ family has the freedom to live their truth, which they determine, without fear, and with equality. And by equality, they don't use the same definition that we use. We'll talk about that next time. By expanding LGBTQ rights through what? Legislation. They have a political agenda. And what is that agenda? Well, you see it in their recent publication, Safer Sex for Trans Bodies. You can download this. It's a PDF on the website. I downloaded it just so that I could read it. The first couple pages, it's about 17 pages, the first couple pages are all about redefining definitions. And as you look at it, what they, in essence, are saying, and after that it gets into just stuff I don't want to even talk about, but it promotes better sex for transgender people by redefining basic male and female body parts so as to further erase the idea of biological sex. We got to get rid of this idea of biological sex, and how we're going to do that is we're going to change all the language. For example, a biological woman no longer has a vagina. She has a front hole. A transgender woman, a man who becomes a woman, she has a vagina. And every gender has a penis. Did you know that? If you can change the language, you can change the thinking. And that's their agenda, and it's political in nature. Tim Quartus, LPC, is a licensed counselor, professional counselor in the Ypsilanti area, wrote in a blog post, Quillet. He was certified as a national sex therapist through at the University of Michigan. It's a year course study. And in this blog post, he writes his experience of it. And he says this: the AASECT, let's see if I can remember what that is now, the American Association of Sexual Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, it's a national organization, is openly pushing a gender ideology that, viewed through the lens of power and oppression, a worldview rooted academically in critical theory and politically in faddish ideas connected to social justice. In other words, he went through this year course, and what he comes out saying is this: they're just pushing a political agenda. It's not about science, it's about a political agenda. In other words, the gender revolution is actively pushing this political agenda, this radical agenda, to make mainstream its political and radical ideology. That's what they're doing. Again, another question: how are they doing that? If they're really out to do it, how are they doing it? And is it influencing us? Well, they're doing it through three main vehicles. More that we could talk about, but these are the three main vehicles that you can see happening all around us. First, vehicle number one, through Hollywood and entertainment. If you just look at some of the things, all the new things, the shows, the themes of those shows that are on the internet today, on TV today, in the movies today, they're all promoting gay, bisexual, transgender lifestyles. And not only that, they're promoting them by marketing them to who? Kids. For example, I just went through some of the things this past month and found out, gosh, these all have those themes. Will and Grace, which has been around for a while. Ellen, which has been around for a while. The new Disney production, Beauty and the Beast. Disney's Good Luck Charlie. Netflix, Orange is the New Black. The Modern Family. Becoming Us. And Transparent, which is a Prime Video. All these things are promoting this agenda. Why? Why use entertainment? Well, because what entertains us gradually changes us. What you used to stand against, if you can begin to laugh about it, sooner or later you begin to what? Accept it, not think much about it, and so well, I guess it isn't bad. Vehicle number one, they're promoting this radical agenda through a radical ideology, through this political agenda, and we're experiencing it through Hollywood entertainment. Number two, through public education. I don't know if you know what's going on in your kids' schools, but ask your kids if they've heard about the genderbread person. This is being taught in elementary school. And what it is, along with the gender unicorn. If you don't like the genderbread, and they don't like the genderbread person, you know why? The LGBTQ movement doesn't like it, you know why? Because it looks too male. So they've come up with the second one, the gender unicorn. But whatever one you use, they're giving it to kids, and they're saying, everybody is different, and you got to determine who you are, and here's the paradigm to determine who you are. Now, why are they doing this? Well, they're doing it not only because through entertainment, because they know what entertains us naturally changes us, but they're doing it with kids because they know what kids are told by adults to believe, guess what? They'll believe. And you know what that's called? Indoctrination. Something else. You ever heard of Drag Queen Story Hour? Drag Queen Story Hour is an organization. They have chapters in 28 different states and 6 countries. And I checked, there is none in Michigan, but if you want one, you can contact them and they will work with you to get a chapter in Oakland County or in Macomb County, wherever you want. So, just so you know. But what is the Drag Queen Story Hour? Well, let's let them tell us. This is on their website. The Drag Queen Story Hour is just what it sounds like. Drag queens reading stories to children in libraries, schools, and bookstores. DQSH, Drag Queen Story Hour, captures the imagination and play of gender fluidity of childhood and gives kids glamorous, positive, and unabashedly queer role models. In spaces like this, kids are able to see people who defy rigid gender restrictions, like boy and girl, male and female. And imagine a world where people can present as they wish, where dress up isn't pretend, but it's real. That's going on in public schools today, guys, in libraries, in bookstores. Check it out. It's worse than you think. The third, not only are they pushing their agenda through entertainment, through public education, but through public policy and law. You ever heard of the Equality Act? The Equality Act was passed by the House in May of 2019, and it works to make gender identity a civil rights issue. It's a civil rights issue comparable to the civil rights of blacks in the 60s. That's what they're trying to make it into. In fact, they're trying to attach it to it. Now, it passed in the House in May of 2019, but it's not law yet. Why isn't it law yet? Because for it to become law, it has to be passed also by the Senate and then signed by the President. That hasn't happened, but it's pending. Now, what is the Equality Act? Well, the Heritage Foundation, you go to their website, and they really break this down. But 6 things they tell us. If made law, it will fine and shut down businesses that do not conform to new sexual norms, like bakeries and flower shops, those type of things. It will force medical professionals and insurance companies to provide and pay for transgender therapies, which, by the way, guys, are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It will provide gender transition care for children as young as 4 years old. Can you imagine giving puberty blockers to kids that young? What it does to them? It will threaten parental rights in making medical decisions for your kids. In fact, your kids may be talking to their teachers about this, and they may even have a whole another different name that they call themselves at school. And if you're a parent, you aren't even legally have to know that name. The teachers, the school doesn't need to tell you that. And they can also begin this process without parental acknowledgement. It will dismantle sex-specific sports and facilities, bathrooms and locker rooms. The whole Title IX thing for women is going to be thrown out the window. That's what Martina Navratilova is fighting against. And that's why she's no longer the darling of the movement. Now she's the enemy of the movement. And it will shut down faith-based adoption and foster care agencies. Why? Because faith-based Christian organizations like that will not give kids to anyone but male, female, married couples. Why? Because that's our Christian belief, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and family comes out of marriage. Also, in addition to that policy, or that law, it's pending, which if it continues to move forward, we see the election as the media is wanting it to move forward in, you can be sure this next year it will be signed. In addition to that, there are state and local pronoun laws, misgendering laws they're called. And misgendering laws are outlawed because it's called hate speech. In New York City, if you misgender somebody, you are given a $250,000 fine. In the state of California, if you misgender somebody and you are a health worker, you can go to jail. You say, well, what is misgendering somebody? Well, what are your pronouns? That's the question. And that's the appropriate etiquette today. When you meet somebody, you don't know them, what you're supposed to ask is, what are your pronouns, so that I can acknowledge you as you really are, not assume I know who you are. And if I don't, then that's just all part of hate speech. Well, my pronouns may be he, him, or his, or they may be ze, her, and her, or they may even be they, them, and their. Fred's pronouns are they, them, and their. And so if we're going to talk about Fred, it's going to sound something like this. I like Fred because they is a good person. I gave them a $100 gift card to spend on whatever makes them happy. I just hope they spends it on their and not their friend George. Guys, that just doesn't make sense, does it? You don't think in those terms. It violates grammar so much. But you know what? Again, why the change in pronouns? Well, because to change the way people think, you must change the way people speak. Change the language and you change the culture. That's what this is about. Also notice something else. All these public policies and laws, they tell us that they are shields to protect the civil rights of transgenders. But they're really not shields to protect the transgenders, are they? They're swords. In reality, they're swords to impose the political agenda, the radical ideology mainstream. And what does it mean to be mainstream? Not just tolerate it, but what? To celebrate it. That's why you have bake the cake. or else. This is Jack Phillips in Colorado, Masterpiece Bakery. I think he has gone to court 5 different times. They keep targeting him, because they want to destroy him. Because he will not, he'll bake a cake for a gay person, whatever it is, but not for a gay wedding, because that goes against his belief as a Christian. The message here is this: what threatens people ensures their compliance. Even if you won't embrace it, we're going to force you to bow the knee. And we'll do it by threatening you. And so then, to understand the signs of the times, 4 things we need to know. It's built around a genuine concern, it's centered in a radical ideology, and it's actively pushing a political agenda. One more thing before we close. The gender revolution is serious about changing our minds. It really is. It's not content for us just to be silent and tolerate it. They're going after your minds. They're going after your children's minds. How are they doing this? By proclaiming an evangelistic message. What's the word evangelistic mean? Yeah, it's faith-based. It has passion, and its passion is, I want to change you. I want to evangelize you. I want to change your mind so you embrace my message with all that you are. It has that fervor to it. And what is the message? If you don't accept, support, and celebrate America's new orthodoxy about human identity, then you are a bad person. In fact, if you are a bad person like this, that means you are less than human. And what do you do in a society where you have people that are less than human? Well, guess what you do? You re-educate them through diversity training. And there's so much we could say about this. James Lindsay, let me just pick out something. The guy that wrote Cynical Theory, the book that I recommended, he has a website, newdiscourses.com, in which he has lots of articles. In this article, The Diversity Delusion, January 28, 2020, he describes diversity training as this, and he goes into detail. It's worth the read, guys. He describes it as this: the re-education of the unwoke that involves the coercion, mental abuse, and emotional tearing down of the self-identity, worldview, and inalienable rights of targeted dominant groups, so as to inscribe into the mind this new and socially and politically approved worldview. In other words, if you don't believe our message, then you are a bad person, less than human. And we got to re-educate you to get you to be human again, and we will do that by destroying you and then reforming you in our own image. And so, if we would summarize what we saw today, the current storm cloud assaulting America is the gender revolution. It's been progressively developing since the 60s, feminism, gay rights, LGBTQ movement. It's built around a very real, genuine concern, gender identity dysphoria, a very painful struggle that is real and that people is not a choice, it's something that people struggle with, and they're simply looking for relief from the struggle. But they take advantage of that by centering all that around a radical ideology, which says human identity is self-defined, transcending all biological reality. And that is all then about pushing a political agenda to make this radical ideology mainstream. You will celebrate it and bow down to it. And it's actively being implemented today through entertainment, education, and law. And it's serious to change our minds. Embrace this new orthodoxy or else suffer the consequence. And guys, we've all felt the threat of the consequence, haven't we? And what does it cause you to want to do? Just back away, be silent, comply, don't do anything, to have the light turned on you. Well, I want to conclude with a question. The question is this. So what are we to think about this gender revolution and its message about human identity? That it's self-defined, that it's self-determined, has nothing to do with your body, your maleness or femaleness. What are we to think about that? Is it a legitimate message that our heteronormative privilege bias has just blinded us to, like we're being told? If so, then what do? Well, you certainly accept it, support it, and celebrate it. Or is it a deceptive message of the ancient serpent dressed in a new skin and singing the same old message? God is an oppressor, and his ways that he's created us is oppressive, and we need to be liberated from. If so, we take a whole different approach to that, isn't it? That's what it means then to speak into the chaos. So how will we know if this is a legitimate message or if it's a deceptive message? How will we know, guys? Well, remember what Jesus says. To understand the signs of the times, we must interpret them through the lens of the Scripture. And so next time, we're going to go back again to the account of creation and look at the goodness of the creation order, the fixed creation order that makes very good the world in which we live. And we're going to ask, what does it mean to be human? Does the Bible tell us what to think about human identity? Is it clear? And is it important? That's what we're going to talk about next time. Okay? Good to be here with you guys and the guys on the internet tonight. Good to this morning. Good to have you. And we will see you guys later.